Coming up on Bridge City News, the organizer of the pop-up injection site in downtown Lethbridge has been fined by the city. We have the details. The new Lethbridge police chief responds to residents' complaints of former employees of Arches setting up that unsanctioned injection site. And as the U.S. election nears, tens of thousands of Christians marched in Washington, D.C., praying for their country.
Your nation, your province, your southern Alberta. From the heart of Lethbridge, it's Bridge City News with Hal Roberts.
Thanks so much for joining us. The organizer who set up a tent which housed an unsanctioned injection site in Lethbridge has been fined $300. The site popped up at Galt Gardens on Friday night, and on Saturday, the group known as the Lethbridge Overdose Prevention Society moved to a field near the Civic Centre. The group is led by former Arches employee Tim Slaney. The site offered naloxone kits and other supports. As part of bylaw 5651, no person is allowed to camp in a park or erect a tent in a park unless allowed by a permit. The province already has a mobile supervised consumption site set up near the soup kitchen since funding for the SES at Arches was pulled back in July. Criminal charges were not laid against any members of the Lethbridge Overdose Prevention Society. BCN spoke with Lethbridge Police Chief Shaheen Medizadeh about why that was.
There has to be a criminal behavior that's observed before we can get engaged in a criminal activity. And even then, when you look at criminal activities, there is also discretion given to the police to make sure if we go there, we are making the right decision. There are certain things we are considering as far as criminal charges. We hope we don't have to come to that, but we continue to encourage these folks to send the users to the proper facilities that have been approved by Health Canada. That way they can get the true right treatment for their own safety. I certainly believe that they will come up again. Again, it's all about what we can do through respectful, proper dialogue and education to make sure how we can collectively work to keep people safe.
There have been no more reports of tents popping up featuring an unsanctioned injection site since last Saturday. The issue of missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls was first made into a report in Canada a few years ago. It highlighted the abuse and violations Indigenous women and girls face on a daily basis. As Micah Quinn explains now, a Lethbridge committee made their case to the Community Issues Committee yesterday to put into action over 25 recommendations regarding the issue.
Just over a year ago, the Reconciliation Lethbridge Advisory Committee has been reviewing the final report of the Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women and Girls Inquiry. That inquiry delivered just over 231 calls for justice. Their job was to make a draft of recommendations to the Community Issues Committee for the role the City of Lethbridge can take to implement these actions.
It's extremely important because there were families here that were impacted and affected by that issue. And the violence from all of these structures is actually ongoing. And so it's important to acknowledge that, first of all.
In the draft drawn up by the committee, they highlighted over 25 recommendations to guide the city and help with reconciliation.
So the first recommendation is to implement the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People. That one was chosen because that document speaks specifically to how to implement human rights for Indigenous people here in the city, specifically women's, girls, and two-spirited people.
Arlac was happy with the Community Issues Committee's response to the presentation, but they hope that the over 25 recommendations will be accepted.
I think they were positive. It is always hard to assess where you are, but I think we have to look at the good and the bad. So, we're working together collectively, and that's what's important.
Because how many calls to justice are there? There's 231. And to ask people to whittle it down, the woman that we're dealing with every single day, us, our sisters, all of us are affected. And it's not stopping. We need to start creating safe spaces for our population to thrive and grow.
The next steps for the committee is to have the CIC accept the recommendations and develop a plan and budget through administration. For Bridge City News, I'm Micah Quinn.
For a third straight year, the United Way has partnered with the Reconciliation Advisory Committee to host a local art and media contest. This year's theme is Indigenous Plants and Medicine. As BCN's Ainsley O'Reilly explains, organizers are eager to see how the theme is incorporated into the submissions.
Both Indigenous and non-Indigenous artists are encouraged to submit.
Whether it's spoken word, whether it's a poem, a video, a short video, a sculpted piece, artwork, a collage.
Last year's winner brought both visual appeal and a powerful message.
A handcrafted doll prepared by Melvina Braverock, and the work was titled In Transition. So the doll was wearing handcrafted garments and the accessories she made all by hand, and it was an interpretation of her time in the residential school system.
The theme is Indigenous plants and medicines, to coincide with the United Nations Declaration of 2020 as the International Year of Plant Health.
And interpret how Indigenous plants and medicines can be a part of reconciliation in the future and what their significance was in the past.
Hoping that people will share some of their traditional knowledge that they've learned from their grandparents, from their parents, in how things were done and how we protected plants and we protected the land, and how we go to the land for teachings and how that looks and what that means to them.
The top 3 winners will receive a cash prize, including $350 for first place. For Bridge City News, I'm Ainsley O'Reilly.
New numbers have been released by the Alberta government as to the number of novel coronavirus cases in our province. Alberta currently has 1,571 active cases of COVID-19. Just over 16,000 people have now recovered from the virus. More than 1 million people have been tested so far. Now here in the South Zone, there are currently 40 active cases. Here are just some of the areas impacted by the novel coronavirus. The city of Lethbridge currently has 4 active cases. Lethbridge County has 5. Medicine Hat has 4. Cypress County 2 active cases. Brooks has 4. And Cardston County has 2 active cases of COVID-19. As Thanksgiving approaches in our country, BC's Provincial Health Officer Dr. Bonnie Henry is encouraging people to keep gathering small and to connect with family in other parts of Canada virtually. She says she's also been receiving many questions about Halloween.
So things that we're looking at are, we cannot have those big parties where lots of people are getting together, whether it's young people partying in costumes or whether it's the trick-or-treating. So we have advice to people about how to do that in a safe way. So outside, small groups, not requiring people to sing for their treats. Having things prepackaged in ones so that children can come one at a time, those types of things. We've also put in some guidance for people who, having a Halloween party is a really important thing for them. Again, small numbers, outside, over time, how to do things in a way that doesn't bring people together inside.
BC currently has 1,562 active cases of the coronavirus. There have also been 233 deaths attributed to the virus. Ontario reported another 554 new cases of COVID-19 today, along with 4 new deaths related to the virus. Health Minister Christine Elliott says 62% of the new cases are among young people under the age of 40. She says the majority of the cases are in the Greater Toronto area, with 251 in Toronto and 79 in the Peel region. The province conducted just over 38,000 tests since the last daily report. The campaign for Saskatchewan's fixed-date provincial election on October 26th is now underway. Premier Scott Moe met with the Lieutenant Governor earlier today to ask him to dissolve the legislature. Election Saskatchewan is working to hold the vote safely during the pandemic by increasing the number of polling stations and stocking up on face masks and sanitizer. Moe's Saskatchewan party had 46 seats at dissolution, while opposition NDP had just 13. As the World Health Organization sends 120 million rapid COVID-19 tests to poorer countries, Conservative health critic Michelle Rempel-Garner is asking why Canadians cannot use them yet. Health Minister Patty Hajdu says the technology is complicated and needs to be proven before Canada approves it.
The health minister agreed to pay $237 million to Baylis Medical for 10,000 ventilators, although the devices were not approved in any jurisdiction. This, of course, is the Baylis Medical of Frank Baylis, former Liberal MP. So why was there a fast track for Mr. Baylis's device but no fast track for rapid testing that every Canadian needs right now? Why is a former Liberal MP with a technology that has no track record of being approved anywhere in the world getting a special deal?
She may recall in March, we went out to businesses right across the country and said we needed your support to build up personal protective equipment capacity right here in Canada. And they heard our call loud and clear. There are over 1,000 businesses that have retooled and scaled up their operations to make sure that we have the appropriate personal protective equipment for frontline healthcare workers, Mr. Speaker. And I'm very proud of that track record and will continue to support our healthcare workers and make sure we support the broader economy as well.
Canada is committing another $400 million in development and humanitarian spending towards fighting COVID-19. Prime Minister Justin Trudeau made the pledge during a UN video conference that he co-hosted. Trudeau says our country will invest more in the coming years, and he will continue to advocate for debt relief for countries facing economic hardship because of the pandemic. The Parliamentary Budget Office says our country's 2020 deficit is on track to hit $320 billion as a result of spending associated with COVID-19. That number is expected to fall to around $74 billion next year, but officials say it all depends upon the timing of the vaccine, an extension on pandemic-related aid, or the creation of new programs. The Liberals said the deficit would be around $343 billion, but that did not include new possible spending or measures coming in under budget. Lethbridge Conservative MP Rachel Harder says Prime Minister's Bring Back Better initiative, which includes billions more in spending, is not a healthy way of running a country. Harder says adding to the debt while ignoring some of Alberta's biggest industries is not a solid plan.
I would have to ask, in what world is it building back better to put tons and tons and tons of debt on the shoulders of our children and our grandchildren? In what world is it building back better to completely ignore the energy sector? In what world is it building back better to ignore the agriculture sector and the fact that they feed not only Canada, but the entire world? That's not a plan to build Canada back better, to ignore those industries. We need a prime minister who has a plan. We need a prime minister who will take leadership. We need a prime minister who will put measurable steps in place in order to bring back Canada.
Lethbridge MP Rachel Harder will also be discussing if she thinks we will have an early election. That interview is coming up later in our program. The worldwide death toll from the coronavirus pandemic has now hit 1 million people. The milestone recorded by Johns Hopkins University comes more than 9 months into a crisis that forced millions to change the way they live, learn, and work.
We like right, Dad. You can absolutely do that.
My daughter Sophia comes here to talk with her therapist because her father has passed away at the end of April. My husband was a young man, he was healthy.
We woke up and
And then one day Daddy was sick and then he was gone. Yeah. When a tragedy happens, you have your loved ones next to you, or you have your friends next to you, or your teachers next to you. But it was just us.
There have been 33.4 million coronavirus cases around the world, but 23.2 million people have recovered. In Canada, meanwhile, 9,289 people have died from the virus. We've had 157,000 cases, but fortunately, 133,000 people have now recovered. Northern California's wine country is on fire as strong winds fan flames in the already scorched region. This prompted evacuation orders for more than 50,000 people.
It was such a relief that some of our houses were still here and everything, but it was a scary night. It was crazy for sure.
What do you think looks about your neighbors here?
I feel so bad for them. Like, I can imagine how they feel based off how I felt all night thinking, I lost my house as well, but I feel so bad for everyone that lost their house last night. It's so sad.
3 people were arrested after a church in Moscow, Idaho, held a psalm singing event without masks in a city hall parking lot. It was in violation of the town's mask order. Christ Church pastor Ben Zorn says the event last Wednesday was aimed at criticizing what he called a largely groundless mask order. It was issued by City Council to slow the spread of COVID-19. 3 were arrested on suspicion of resisting or obstructing police officers. Close to 200 people attended the event, including Gabriel Wrench, one of the church deacons who was arrested. With the U.S. just weeks away from a presidential election, tens of thousands of Christians gathered in Washington, D.C. to pray for the United States. Evangelist Franklin Graham led a prayer march starting at the Lincoln Memorial, while a day of prayer and repentance called The Return was hosted by Pastor Jonathan Cahn. As we hear in this next report, U.S. Vice President Mike Pence made a surprise appearance to thank everyone for their prayers.
Tens of thousands gathered in Washington, D.C. for 2 major Christian prayer events on Saturday, September 26. The Return was a national and global day of prayer and repentance led by Christian leader and author Jonathan Cahn.
And as the voice of Elijah called out to his nation in ancient times, it now cries out to America, how long, America, will you waver between 2 opinions? If the Lord is God, then serve him.
While evangelist Franklin Graham led a 1.8-mile prayer march starting at the Lincoln Memorial.
Everybody understands that our nation's in trouble. And everyone's a little confused as to what to do. But God can fix this.
And the crowds were surprised by a visit from Vice President Mike Pence.
And in these challenging times, we do well, as you do today, to remember that in everything, by prayer and petition with thanksgiving, that we're to present our request to God. And we can claim the promise that the peace of God that passes all understanding will guard our hearts and minds in Christ Jesus.
Thousands of believers traveled from across America to be there for the significant day, with many arriving in buses.
We just want to come in a big group and pray for everybody and ask God to help unite the nation back together.
I've come to Washington to participate in the National Prayer March with Franklin Graham, and to just support our great nation.
And Khan issued this challenge to those who came from across the nation and those tuning in on the live simulcast across the globe.
Return, America, and I will have mercy on you, and I will be your peace, and I will give healing for your wounds.
Peter Wooding for the Global News Alliance.
And it's so great to see. The Tampa Bay Lightning are the 2020 Stanley Cup champions. Tampa Bay beat the Dallas Stars 2-0 last night, winning the series 4-2. This is the second championship for the Lightning. Their first was back in 2004 when they beat the Calgary Flames. Now, speaking of Calgary, Tampa had a native Calgarian playing for them last night. Braden Point was born in the Stampede City and went on to play for the Moose Jaw Warriors of the WHL before being drafted by the Lightning. Today, he's a Stanley Cup champion. As for the playoff MVP, the Conn Smythe Trophy went to the Lightning's Victor Hedman. Congrats going out to Coach John Cooper and the Tampa Bay Lightning on a great season. It's not feeling anything like hockey weather these days. The warmer temperatures should continue for the rest of the week. Full weather details are on deck. Just a few clouds today, and once again we were over 20 degrees. Tonight, increasing clouds with a low near 9. Jeanette Rocher is here now with a full look at the long-range weather forecast and how the rest of the week is shaping up quite nicely.
And let's take a look at our 5-day forecast, beginning with tomorrow, Wednesday. Mix of sun and cloud, 16 degrees is the high. A high of 19 expected for Thursday under sunny skies. That sunshine should persist through Friday and Saturday with highs of 20 degrees for both days. 26 expected for Sunday with a mix of sun and cloud, and a beautiful day on Monday as well. High of 25 with a mix of sun and cloud as well. The almanac tells us that the average high for this time of year is 18 degrees. The average low, 3 degrees. 32 was our high temperature back in 1963, and -8 was the low temperature in 1985. The sun rose this morning at 7:29 a.m. and our sun set for this Tuesday evening, 7:14 p.m. Now taking a look across the nation, starting on the west coast, lots of sunshine expected for both Victoria and Vancouver, with highs of 22 in Victoria, 20 in Vancouver. Sunshine expected in Edmonton with a high of 15, 14 degrees expected to be the high in Calgary with a mix of sun and cloud. Over in Saskatoon and Regina, mix of sun and cloud for both of those cities, high of 10 in Saskatoon, 13 in Regina. 12 degrees is the high in Winnipeg with a 60% chance of showers and some wind gusts up to 60 km per hour. Toronto could see a risk of a thunderstorm in the afternoon, high of 17. 17 also expected to be the high in Ottawa with periods of rain. Chance of showers also in Montreal with a high of 15. Showers expected throughout the rest of the east here. Fredericton's high 22, 25 the high in Charlottetown. Halifax will also see rain with a high of 21 and showers expected tomorrow in St. John's, Newfoundland with a high of 23 degrees.
The Canadian Food Inspection Agency says JBS Food Canada is recalling some Provigo ground beef products that may contain E. coli. The agency says the products impacted by the recall are club packs of medium ground beef or fresh lean ground beef with best before dates ranging from September 16th to the 18th. The agency says the products were sold at Provigo in Gatineau, Quebec. The U.S. continues to take a run at Canada's softwood lumber industry. The Trump administration is appealing a World Trade Organization ruling against its softwood lumber duties. In April of 2017, the U.S. imposed duties averaging around 20% on most Canadian softwood exports. The Americans alleged Canada was unfairly subsidizing its industry, then dumping wood in the U.S. at unfair prices. The WTO ruled the U.S. could not back up those claims. Unifor members have voted to approve a new contract from the Ford Motor Company. It runs through 2023 and includes a $1.8 billion investment to build electric vehicles at the company's plant in Oakville, Ontario, and $148 million for Windsor powertrain plants. The union says around 81% of workers voted yes to the deal, which will set the tone for the upcoming contract talks with both Fiat Chrysler and General Motors. Now, here's a look at today's markets. Here's a look at the markets as of 3:30 p.m. Mountain Time. The TSX was down 31 points to 16,211. The Dow was down 131 points to 27,452. The S&P 500 was down 16 to 3335, and the Nasdaq was down 32 to 11,085. West Texas Intermediate oil was down $1.49 to $39.11 US per barrel. Natural gas was down 30 cents to $2.50 US. Gold was up 7 cents to $18.9814 US an ounce, and silver was unchanged at $24.19 US an ounce. Wheat is at $240 per metric ton, barley's at $235, canola's at $5.12, and corn is at $260 per metric ton. Live cattle were up $1.48 to $113.13, feeder cattle were up $2 to $142.93, and lean hogs were down $2.05 to $61.98. The Canadian dollar was up slightly over the last 24 hours to 74.70 US. Recapping one of our top stories this hour, Canada is committing another $400 million in development and humanitarian spending towards fighting COVID-19. Prime Minister Justin Trudeau made the pledge during a UN video conference that he co-hosted. Trudeau says our country will invest more in the coming years, and he will continue to advocate for debt relief for countries facing economic hardship because of the pandemic. Lethbridge MP Rachel Harder will be hosting an online town hall meeting Wednesday night at 7 o'clock. But first, she chatted with BCN about some of the biggest concerns people in southwestern Alberta have with the Trudeau Liberals. That Q&A is on deck. But right now, here's a look at what's happening in and around your community.
Here's your Bridge City News community calendar. Lethbridge MP Rachel Harder is holding a virtual town meeting on Wednesday, September 30th at 7 p.m. She'll be providing a parliamentary update on what's taking place in Ottawa, including an overview of the speech from the throne. If you'd like to participate over Zoom or by phone, visit rachelharder.ca for details. Bring your lunch and enjoy beautiful live music at the same time. Come out October 2nd to the First Friday Lunch and Listen concert series featuring performances by the University of Lethbridge Conservatory of Music in Cass's Community Room beginning 12:15 p.m. and ending at 1. First Friday events are an initiative brought to you by the Heart of Our City Committee. For a full listing of upcoming events, visit firstfridaylethbridge.com. The Helen Schuler Nature Center is hosting a food forest workshop presented by Mandy Sandbach of Soulfully Soil on October 3rd and 4th from 9:30 a.m. to 4:30 p.m. Explore the world of food forestry and permaculture and discover how to create abundant perennial food systems right at home. Each day will include an outdoor tour. This workshop is open to those ages 16 and up. Cost is $180 and masks will be required inside the building. To register, call 403-320-3064. And that's your Bridge City News Community Calendar.
Parliament is back in session following the Liberals' throne speech. Now, prior to Parliament being prorogued, there was a committee investigating the We Charity scandal. Will that investigation continue now that MPs are back in Ottawa? To discuss this in more detail is Lethbridge Tory MP Rachel Harder, who joins me now from our nation's capital. Rachel, welcome back to BCN.
Thank you so much, Hal. It's really great to be with you.
Now, will the investigation into the We Charity scandal continue now that MPs are back? What are your thoughts?
Well, Hal, I certainly hope so. You know, Canadians deserve answers. There's some really good questions that are being asked with regards to the We Charity and $912 million that was committed from Trudeau to the charity in order to roll out a youth employment program, or a youth volunteer program, I should say. You know, there's a lot of scandal around that, and Canadians rightly deserve answers to those questions that they have. Now, here's the thing, is that Trudeau actually shut down Parliament in August by proroguing it. So it's not a pause button that he hit. It's actually a total cancellation of what was going on prior to that. And so in order for committee to come back and investigate the scandal and the ethics breaches that were undertaken by this prime minister, there has to be a motion passed at committee. And so we'll see. You know, Conservatives are certainly on board. We certainly want to get to the bottom of this. We want answers for Canadians. We'll have to see if the NDP and the Bloc are on board.
How much do you think this has really hurt Trudeau's popularity? Some people refer to him as the Teflon man because nothing really sticks to him. I mean, the Aga Khan, you know, the SNC-Lavalin affair, now We Charity scandal. I mean, he's still quite popular in many parts of Canada. Why do you think that is? Is it the handouts maybe that he's dishing out right now during the pandemic?
Hal, it's a really good question. And, you know, the best I can do is actually turn the question back out there. And that is to say, you know, what is it that this prime minister is doing that, you know, Canadians find so appealing? I'm not entirely sure. You know, I think in the next election, of course, we're going to find out, you know, exactly, was it the handouts that they're attracted to? Is it his good looks, his great hair, you know, supposedly? But at the end of the day, look, I think there's something that needs to be said here, and that is this country deserves leadership with vision. This country deserves a prime minister who will implement you know, a way to come back from the pandemic and the detriment that it has had on our economy. Canadians deserve to know that they have a solid leader at the helm, and right now I would certainly argue that they don't.
Now, Rachel, with the pandemic still on, are MPs deciding to vote on certain issues via video conferencing or in person, or is it kind of maybe a hybrid model being used right now?
Yeah, exactly. So right now there's a hybrid model being used in Parliament. And so there are some MPs who are able to sit in the House of Commons and some who have to log on virtually. The unfortunate thing about this way of doing things, of course, is those MPs that are in rural areas don't actually have strong enough reception to be able to participate. And so they have to leave their ridings and go into urban centers where they can access, you know, broadband or internet that will help them. In addition to that, though, you know, I think we should look at the fact that other parliaments around the world are able to meet in person and they're able to do so safely. In addition to that, here in Canada, we're sending our kids to school and they're wearing masks and they're sitting in close proximity. And we expect them to be able to go and function and be kept safe. Why can't we, as parliamentarians who have been elected by the Canadian public, do the exact same thing?
Now let's circle back to the spending for just a moment here. Canada's deficit is now approaching $380 billion. Our debt is over $1 trillion. As a country, Rachel, we're going to have to start paying back some of the billions of dollars that the Liberals are doling out. I guess it's safe to say that we're not going to be balancing the books anytime soon?
Yeah, Hal, I think you've hit the nail on the head. You know, Trudeau likes to use this phrase that with COVID, we're able to now build back better, he likes to say. I would have to ask, you know, in what world is it building back better to put tons and tons and tons of debt on the shoulders of our children and our grandchildren. In what world is it building back better to completely ignore the energy sector? In what world is it building back better to ignore the agriculture sector and the fact that they feed not only Canada but the entire world? You know, that's not a plan to build Canada back better to ignore those industries. We need a prime minister who has a plan. We need a prime minister who will take leadership. We need a prime minister who will put measurable steps in place in order to bring back Canada.
Now that the NDP has thrown their support behind many of the Liberal spending initiatives, is it safe to say that we may not be seeing an election anytime soon?
Well, you know, I, it certainly appears that way, Hal. It would certainly appear that the Liberals have leaned so far to the political left that they have somehow pacified the NDP.
Wow. Newly elected Conservative leader Aaron O'Toole says he wants to keep Canada in the Paris Climate Accord, but still wants to support Alberta's energy sector. How is that possible? How do you harmonize the two?
If we're going to move forward in terms of the strides we want to make with regard to caring for the planet and you know, stewarding our environment, we're going to have to rely largely on innovative practices, which means that we're going to have to get industry involved. This really isn't a solution that's going to be built by government. Yes, government can put vision forward, but ultimately it's going to be the women and men in this country who have incredible intellect and the ability to innovate and come up with new technologies that are going to bring us forward. Ultimately, that's what we're going to be relying on in our plan as Conservatives.
Energy East was taken off the table, getting our oil and gas to Eastern Canada back in 2017. Kenny was talking to Aaron O'Toole about it and so forth. Now, is the Conservative Party of Canada putting any pressure on the Liberals to potentially bring it back? Or maybe a new Energy East? Many Canadians agree that those in the Maritimes should not be buying Saudi Arabian oil, they should be buying Alberta oil.
Yeah, again, really good point, Hal. You know, we certainly have been pushing for a unifying strategy. So one that would bring Eastern and Western Canada together, one that would celebrate our natural resource sector, and in particular, you know, the production of oil and gas, and of course, you know, getting that to market. Part of that is, you know, being able to utilize that resource right here within our own country. Right now, we are, you know, ignoring this industry under Trudeau. And as a result, then the Prime Minister of Canada is currently supporting regimes like Saudi Arabia, which have an atrocious human rights record and don't have policies in place with regards to protecting the environment. Again, I would beg the question, in what world does that make sense? We have an incredible industry right here within our own country. We have the ability to transport product from east to west. We just need to put the infrastructure in place. The only thing that is required is political will. We certainly haven't seen that from Trudeau, but we certainly have that in our leader, Aaron O'Toole.
How should Alberta maybe look at diversifying its economy? We've talked about agriculture in the past, the oil and gas sector. Now, I know Alberta Energy Minister Sonia Savage is talking about delving into more of the minerals, the potash, the uranium, and so forth. What are your thoughts about how can we really diversify?
Sure, I think it's both. You know, again, we have natural resources at our fingertips, and we certainly need to continue to develop the ones that we already are. As long as there's a market, which there is, we should be looking for creative ways to access that market in order to sell our product, in order to generate revenue. Because we know, Hal, that at the end of the day, that revenue that comes off of oil and gas development is what pays tens of thousands of workers and makes sure that their families are kept care of. You know, in addition to that, we know that it's that revenue that pays for hospitals and schools and roads and bridges and other important infrastructure. So yes, we should be talking about innovation. We should be talking about creativity. We should be talking about moving forward in other sectors and diversifying our economy. Absolutely, all day long. Let's have that conversation. But let's also be realists and understand the fact that there is a need for energy right now, and that need only grows by day.
Calgary Tory MP Michelle Rempel-Garner has an online petition, E2574, I believe it is, against the Liberals' gun ban, saying it does nothing to address gun crime in our country, but instead penalizes lawful gun owners, especially those on farms and acreages. This is the largest online petition in Canadian history with close to 231,000 signatures. But let me ask you something, Rachel. Will it make a difference? Will this influence Prime Minister Justin Trudeau to not confiscate legally owned property?
Well, Hal, certainly a good prime minister would take into account the fact that this petition has been signed by so many Canadians. I mean, after all, Canada is a democracy. I understand that this prime minister would very much like to turn Canada into a socialized nation, or a socialist country, I should say. But the fact of the matter is, we are a parliamentary democracy. And under that system, those Canadians who signed that petition should be taken into account. They should be considered. This prime minister should listen to their voices, should give them weight, and should make changes accordingly.
Now let's discuss the drug crisis going on in our city here in Lethbridge. And now there's a new group calling itself the Lethbridge Overdose Prevention Society, or LOPS, opening up an unsanctioned tent injection site. Now the province says it's illegal. Mayor Spearman says he's willing to work with the province to help find a solution. But you, being an MP, how about in Ottawa? What can Ottawa do to really help with our solution on our drug crisis here?
Well, again, Hal, you're asking a question that overlaps between municipal, provincial, and federal politics. Certainly as member of parliament for Lethbridge, it is my local community, and I am very interested in the issues that impact those who call it home. I've heard concern after concern after concern from residents within Lethbridge who very much want their community restored to a place that is safe, that is secure. They want to be able to go out with their children and invite the parks and the recreational spaces that our city has, which we have so many, and that's amazing. But in order to make that happen, we have to have a community effort that works toward a solution. And I would say the provincial government right now, yes, they shut down Arches, and we know that they did that because there was criminal activity taking place within the organization. So yes, the organization was held to account, as they should be. What the provincial government did, though, in order to actually assist our community, is they set up a mobilized injection site. And so there is still an opportunity for people to access a safe space where they can consume the drug of their choice and where they will be protected from overdose. That's in place. And unfortunately, that has largely been ignored as a positive step within our community. And so, as you can tell, Help, there's really no need for this unsanctioned tent. Those individuals who want to be cared for, who want to access medical attention, which is not offered at the tent, but is offered at the mobilized site, they can do so. Again, ultimately, the goal should be a common one here, and that is the safety and the security, the well-being of the citizens who call Lethbridge home.
We've received word that many Alberta farmers have received record crops this year, and livestock markets are set to reach record highs of $7 billion. What can Ottawa do to help support our farmers here in southwestern Alberta and around the country? As you know, agriculture is big business, which will help our economy to recover from the pandemic.
Absolutely, and I'm so glad that you asked the question because this is a big area of passion for me. Agriculture is our superpower. As a country, it is our superpower, and certainly in southern Alberta, it is our superpower. We have access to irrigation. We are able to produce such a variety of crops, and then, of course, animals as well. And so out of that, we are contributing in amazing ways to our economy, but also we are feeding our country. And Hal, it would be worth also noting that there are only 5 countries around the world that produce more food than they consume. And Canada is one of those 5. If that's not worth celebrating, I don't know what is. I mean, that's just amazing. Those men and women who farm day in and day out, they work incredibly hard to look after our country. That's a sector that deserves to be celebrated and further developed. And again, I was really disappointed in the speech from the throne. The Prime Minister gave, hardly an honorable mention to the industry. Why do we not have an economic plan in place that includes those women and men, in a way that is tangible and by which we can overcome the economic instability that we currently face?
Alberta Health Minister Tyler Shandro has said that he will not make the COVID-19 vaccine mandatory in our province. Now, has there been any talk in Ottawa from the federal government looking at bringing forth potential legislation making it mandatory, or is it more of a provincial jurisdiction?
Ultimately, at the end of the day, the provinces are going to have to make decisions on this. Currently, I'm not sure exactly where the current government at a federal level sits on this. My personal position, however, and certainly the position of my party, is that a vaccine should not be made mandatory, that the freedom of Canadians should be protected, that individuals should be given the opportunity to choose whether or not they will, in fact, take a vaccination, should it be offered to them.
Now, Rachel, the COVID-19 pandemic, as we know, has hurt many business owners across the country, including here in our beautiful province of Alberta. A recent survey says 60% of restaurant owners will close their eateries for good if there's another lockdown with a second wave of the virus. How can we better support those business owners?
Again, Hal, an excellent question. I wish you had been in the room with the Prime Minister when he was drafting the throne speech. These are the questions that we would have expected to be answered there. We would have expected that the Prime Minister, after proroguing Parliament and having weeks upon weeks to plan his throne speech, the bare minimum we would expect from him is that he would have a plan for economic recovery. Unfortunately, the only thing that was within that throne speech was one recycled failed promise after another. It was tragedy. It was an absolute tragedy. You would expect the Prime Minister to be able to serve the well-being of Canadians, to be able to put forward a captivating vision, to be able to put measurable steps in front of them, a plan to move forward. Unfortunately, it's Canadians like the ones you've mentioned who have local small businesses, such as restaurants, etc., who are going to be hurt by this Prime Minister's failed policy. At the end of the day, it's really sad. It's really unfortunate because it's those individuals who help keep our local communities vibrant, who provide jobs to other individuals who can support their families then. And unfortunately, they are going to have to close their doors. They are suffering under this Prime Minister's leadership. Very sad.
Lethbridge Conservative MP Rachel Harder, thanks for joining me today from Ottawa.
Thanks, Hal.
We are living in unprecedented times of physical, emotional, and spiritual battles that can cause fear, anxiety, and even depression. These can take a terrible toll on our bodies, minds, and our souls. Many believe that in order to win these battles, we need to learn how to protect ourselves with biblical spiritual principles. Joining me now to talk about it is Adam Davis, a former police officer and author of the book called On Spiritual Combat. Welcome to Bridge City News, Adam.
Thank you so much for having me on today. What a great time to be alive.
Amen, it sure is. Tell me about this book on spiritual combat. What prompted you to write it?
You know, my co-author and I, Lieutenant Colonel Dave Grossman, this was really a project that was based on his book that sold over 500,000 copies on combat. So we wanted to take the psychological and physiological principles from that book and look at what the scripture says. What does God's word have to say about deadly force encounters? What does it say about combat? What does it say about preparing? So we wanted to provide some basic tools. Think of this like spiritual warfare training 101. Like you go to basic police academy or basic training for military. Your first day, your first 3 months is learning the essentials. So that's what we really wanted to do, was provide some insight. And this was just based on some conversations we've had with first responders and military service members across the globe. And it's been very well received.
So Adam, oftentimes we don't really prepare ourselves for a tragedy. How can we do so with not being overly consumed with fear and anxiety?
Yeah, I'll tell you what, fear, there's a study out, and I don't have the exact link to that right now, but I can get it to you. There's a study out that shows that our brains, the same trigger in our mind that responds to drug addiction and other forms of addiction responds to fear the same way. So if we are understanding that hope, it can be more addictive than fear, that we have to be intentional about spending time in God's word, spending time in prayer, and having a lifestyle that is a lifestyle of worship, literally a lifestyle that honors him in everything we do. We understand that the enemies come to give, to kill, to steal, destroy. God sent his son, Jesus. He sent his son to give us abundant life. So practical principles puts into place that his word is the answer we need. A relationship with Jesus is the answer we need. But if we take these principles and say, how does this relate psychologically? How does this relate with our actions and our contribution in society? Then that means that we take the principles of his word, we prepare ourselves through time in worship and studying the word and knowing how to respond to conflict and tragedy. Jesus told us, in this world, you will have trouble. It wasn't you may have trouble. He said, you will have trouble, but take heart. I've overcome the world. He is the only answer. And when we have a relationship with him and his word abides in us and we in him, we become more than conquerors in a world run by the enemy.
Now, you worked as a police officer, Adam. Tell me about your experience dealing with people who suffered from post-traumatic stress disorder.
You know, this a lot of people that deal with this, and a lot of times we limit that description to individuals who have served in some capacity, whether a first responder or military. But it also applies to individuals who have been sexually abused or traumatized or abused in some other form. And we often neglect those things. At the age of 5, I was sexually abused. I've talked about that openly. Didn't address it for 20 years, nearly 20 years before I addressed it, because I wanted to hold on to that pain. I was afraid of dealing with it. I didn't want to address it. And so you deal with the exposure that first responders, specifically in the case that I'm talking about, law enforcement officers, that they deal with day in and day out. Let me tell you something. Human beings were never created to see or experience the things that our men and women of law enforcement deal with day in and day out. The violence, the evil, the hate, they were not intended. They were not created to witness that, to see it, to deal with it. But through proper training and equipping ourselves with his word, we're still human beings. We're still human beings. And we try to carry those things in our own strength and power. So when we rely on the strength of God with the wisdom, the peace that only he can give us, then we can become more effective in our job. It's a dangerous, delicate situation. We shouldn't stereotype people if they have a designation or a diagnosis rather of post-traumatic stress. We should show them more care, and there should be systems in place where first responders are taken care of, not just for that incident, but for life. We should take care of them if they are serving our communities and it has an effect on them. And we have to do a better job of holding elected officials and appointed officials accountable and taking care of our public servants.
So with some of the struggles you've been through, I mean, you were assaulted, you said it at a very young age, also as a police officer, some of the things you must have witnessed. Did you struggle with PTSD yourself? Tell me about that journey.
Yeah, you know, I woke up, I had night sweats, had nightmares, panic attacks, all the symptoms. Now, I never went to a doctor and received a diagnosis, but I can tell you all the symptoms were there. I could go through all the list of things. And how we respond to stress and traumatic experiences often looks like bad behavior or being reckless or things of that nature, because we're constantly chasing this chemical reaction that our bodies have when we're dealing with high stress situations. So for me, it was a case of how do I respond to this? Because I get to the point to where deep down in here, I feel hopeless and completely useless because I feel broken. Warriors aren't supposed to feel this way. We're supposed to be invincible. And that's just not the case. We have to come to the understanding that we're human beings. And the reason Jesus came for us is because we're broken. And without him, we're nothing. And so when I began to see, I can't do this on my own, I can't carry this burden on my own, it became overwhelming and crushing. And it was just various experiences. I was never shot. I was never stabbed. I never took anybody's life. But it was just constantly seeing the evil around us, and some other incidents that I was a part of. I found myself not sleeping well. I found myself waking up with nightmares, drenched in sweat, panicking and not responding well in different situations, and even shutting down and sort of zoning out when I was with my family.
How much did your family help you? Tell me about that.
Yeah. My wife was, she was an absolute divine appointment for me. She demonstrated the unconditional love of Christ, because she would sit and want to talk to me when I come home from my shift. I'm totally, shut down. So understanding how to address these things from a spouse perspective, look at what signs to look for, look at what sort of red flags to look for, and then how to address them. And so that's very important that we do have those conversations, and that's probably something for a later date. But certainly, she helped me by not pushing me. And I'll tell you a real quick story. I know that you're limited on time, but towards the end of my career in law enforcement, she recognized these things. And so on a Friday, I got off duty, and I come home, and she said, "My mom is keeping the kids. We've got a lodge arranged for us in a place away, from about 6 hours away. And so we went to the mountains. We went horseback riding. We spent time away. She said, I recognize that you were exhausted and you needed a break. So recognizing that and taking those steps and just listening to me and being there and being present. And sometimes we're hard to love when we're going through those things and understanding that that's when we need you the most.
Horseback riding sounds like a lot of fun right now, especially up by the
It
mountains.
does.
Now, what's your message, Adam, to people who are struggling with the impact of tragedy in their lives?
Yeah. Let me tell you, my tragedy, your tragedy are different. They're all different. But let me tell you what isn't different. That's the pain we feel inside. That pain we feel is the same. It's deep and it's overwhelming, and sometimes it feels like you can't breathe. For me, I've been there, but there's a real peace found in a relationship with God through His Son Jesus. There is a real peace available when we rely on the power of the Holy Spirit. Let me tell you, the same power that raised Jesus from the dead on the third day resides in you if you're a believer. And if you're not, all you have to do is call on Him. Call on Him wherever you're at, and He will respond. I can guarantee you, if you'll call on Him, He'll respond. I dare you to try Him. Relying on that peace, get into the Word. Find people around you that have walked through the season that you're in, the things that you've gone through, and connect with those people. Don't be afraid to reach out and ask for help. Find a local pastor, a local minister, different groups. One of the things I do is help a group called Reboot Recovery. We have small groups around the country. We're steadily deploying these groups around the country. And I think there's some in Canada, deploying these groups around the country where we are removing the barrier of isolation because that's so dangerous. So having that courage to take a step and say, I need help. And I have a lot of officers that reach out to me from all over the country and Canada, Germany. And it's important that we're willing to get over that initial, I don't want to talk to anybody about this, and so that we can move forward. And it's important to have that and understand the power of faith and resiliency.
Now, you mentioned reaching out to a pastor, Adam. No battles we face should ever be fought alone. No man or woman is an island. What should we know about choosing confidence and mentors that include our spouses or friends or pastors, like you mentioned earlier?
I think it's important to look at people who are around you who have been through something. Look at somebody and the resilient spirit that they've displayed. They've been through some stuff. And you find the people that have been through some stuff and that are willing to love you through your stuff. That's what Jesus does. That's what He did. He met the woman at the well. He wasn't afraid of engaging drama and changing the narrative in the middle of it. He wasn't afraid of addressing death and pain and changing the tone of that conversation. Jesus did that. And so when we want to look for somebody, we want to look for somebody that's compassionate, somebody that's qualified. And what qualifies them is their resiliency, that they've overcome this stuff and that they're willing to talk to you and be confidential about it and get you further help if you need it.
Now, you're right that prayer and fasting can actually make us stronger warriors. Tell me more about that.
Some things we can only overcome with prayer and fasting. And for the past several months, I have put out a national call across the United States. If you aren't living under a rock and you see some of the events that are occurring in America today, you know that this is a season for the body of Christ to come to life, to awake the sleeping, slumbering saints. And this should be a time of fasting and prayer for law enforcement. What it does is it removes us from our reliance upon our flesh and our own wisdom and knowledge. And it reminds us that our strength and our source comes from God Himself. And it comes from a relationship with Him. And when we take the time to rely on Him and be intentional about trusting Him and walking in what I call flashlight faith, you know, His Word said that His Word is a lamp to my feet, a light to my path. I call it flashlight faith. I can't see the whole path, but I can see what's in front of me. And that's all He's called me to do, is take the very next step. And that's all He's calling you to do, is take the next step. Maybe it's the next step towards healing. Maybe it's the next step in equipping yourself and preparing yourself for spiritual warfare. And fasting and prayer is a great way to do that.
Now, training is also very important with anything, for a new job, or if you're an athlete preparing for a major sporting event. Adam, you say training should include prayer drills. What are some of the elements of prayer drills?
Oh my goodness! You think about, you go through the Psalms. You look at some of the Psalms that you have, and David had some great prayers. So you think about how we go through firing drills, or we go through shooting drills, and all of these prayer drills that we talk about are listed in the book, and they're great resources. I'm not going to give them away, but I want to tip you out here. When you're a first responder, law enforcement officer, whether you're in the military, and you're learning to shoot with a firearm, or you're learning to operate different weapons, there's different drills you go through. You want to spend the time becoming familiar. You don't have to have complex, complicated, big words. You want to spend the time to become familiar, and that it's part of everything you do. Just like when you breathe, there's tactical breathing to help you deal with panic attacks or anxiety or high stress. You want that to become part of who you are, because of your everyday life that you have. That it doesn't matter what happens. That's your first step.
Now, sometimes we face multiple threats all at the same time. What's important to remember during those moments? Focus on the one who gives us victory. I'll tell you this. I had a dream recently that I was hiding behind a really big rock, and it was a giant red rock. And I was hiding behind this rock, and there were rounds being shot down where I was at from somebody down the road or down the range, and there were one round after another. And I remember hearing, "Be still." And "be still" to me meant I wasn't qualified. Initially, it meant I wasn't qualified to address the threat. But what it was God saying, "Be still, because I'm going to go take care of the threat down here, so that when you move in your next mission of battle, you're moving forward in victory." So sometimes we have to understand that it's small, subtle changes, small, subtle adjustments. Like if you're adjusting the scope on a firearm, it's not drastic changes. It's small, subtle changes that mean the difference between a hit on target or completely missing your target. So understanding, like in that case, it wasn't that I wasn't qualified or wasn't ready. It was he was literally protecting my journey so that I can move forward in victory. Listen when you pray. Listen to what his word says. He still speaks. His word is alive and well today. I wrote a book in 2017. It released in 2018. It's called Behind the Badge. It's a daily devotion for law enforcement. It's a bestseller in Canada and the United States. I wrote it 3 years ago. If you go and read some of the entries that are today, you would have thought that I had some kind of knowledge for what's going on today. That tells us his word is alive and well, and it speaks life. Wherever you are, no matter what you're going through, go to that word and spend time in it daily. Adam Davis, former police officer and author of the book On Spiritual Combat, thanks for joining me today from Alabama. Hey, thank you so much, Hal, for having me. You bet. On behalf of all of us here at PCN, I'm Hal Roberts. God bless. Thanks so much for watching.